Hello, I'm Natasha Bellefort, and this is Becoming Her Anyway. So in this introduction, I kind of want to jump straight right into it and talk about what this podcast actually is. Essentially, I'm quite an extrovert. I talk a lot. I've had a lot of life experiences. I have suffered. I have, had a lot of good experiences as well, especially with breakups, betrayals, toxic friendships, toxic people, but also especially dysfunctional familial relationships. And honestly, I just want to reach those that are struggling right now, whether you have a dysfunctional family, whether you have a narcissistic parent, or whether you're just going through a difficult time, or even if you're not going through a difficult time, maybe you would like to just listen to these, because obviously I'm not always going to talk about something that's sad, but sometimes I did feel quite alone when I was going through these things. And honestly, I just want to talk about them. So essentially, I came from quite a difficult family. I was the only child and I had two quite mentally ill parents. So my biological father, without getting too deep into my family history, he had narcissistic personality disorder. And at quite a young age, I had to cut him off because obviously it was quite a difficult thing for me. But this podcast is not going to be like, I had this bad experience and now I'm so traumatized. This is not what we're doing. The reason I'm talking about these experiences is because I want to help people, because I want to tell you guys that just because you came from maybe a difficult background, maybe you came from poverty, maybe you have had some difficult struggles, just because you've had that past does not mean that you cannot have a good future. And in this podcast, I'm going to tell you how I have survived the worst year of my life. Last year, 2024, all my worst fears happened in this year, including in my relationships. For example, I was in a relationship and very quickly after this breakup, it was, kind of my first love, I suppose. After a year, not to get too honest. Well, obviously I want to be honest, but not to get too deep at the moment. I had seen myself get replaced by someone who was quite distant from my past. So, but again, this podcast isn't going to be me just saying, oh, I've had this and this happened to me. This whole point of my podcast is I want to talk about what I did. I want to talk about how I dealt with it, how I regulated my own emotions, how I overcame it, how I showed these people that they didn't do anything to me. Even if I was crying at home, I never ever showed that in public. In public, I was fine because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of thinking that they could hurt me. I dealt with some quite toxic people. I dealt with people who I was in a friend group with who, first of all, some of them betrayed me. But there was one girl who I felt that she was trying to get a reaction out of me and would deliberately say things that triggered me. And yes, those things did trigger me. They really hurt me because I was really hurting. I was struggling with quite a difficult breakup, but I never gave her the satisfaction. I never ever showed her that she did anything to me. And that is why in this podcast, we are going to talk about healing. We're going to talk about moving on without closure, without revenge. I'm going to tell you my life experiences in more honesty than I probably should, but I really hope that this helps someone because, for example, I watched The Wizard Liz, right? And she's been a huge inspiration to me. Obviously, I'm quite different to her in many ways, but I did respect her and she's definitely my inspiration. But enough about that. Essentially, in this podcast, I just want you guys to know from a real life girl that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, how much hardship you've endured. You know what does matter? People that endure the hardest things, people that have to endure the worst pain and the way they overcome it. Do you know who you are? You are who you are when everything's taken from you, when you are in pain, when you're suffering, when you're traumatized, in a sense. When you've just come out of something terrible, when you're having a bad day, the way that you react, the way that you take it out on other people, the way that you decide to deal with it, that is who you are. You are not who you are when everything's going well. Because everyone is good. Everyone is happy when everything's going well. Narcissists are happy when everything's going well, right? I suppose there's a lot of reasons why I want to do this podcast. It's not for any one specific reason. I think it would be nice for me to be able to share, but I think it's also nice for people to be able to reflect on my situations, especially if, they've encountered something similar, or perhaps you just want to feel really great about your life. And I'm not saying my life isn't great. I am very grateful for what I have. I have had a lot that other people didn't, but I also lacked what other people had. So, that is life. But honestly, I just want to tell you guys what happened in my life because I want to help you. I want to help myself, but I also want to help you guys. I want to help you guys to love yourselves, to have good habits, to be able to walk away from toxic people, to be able to be lonely and not feel shame. Because do you know what loneliness is? It's the highest self-respect. Loneliness is amazing because if you can be lonely, you can be anything. Anyone could come to you with crumbs and scraps and go, oh, I love you, but never do anything to show it. I mean, a man could come to you and tell you everything, tell you you're his dream girl and that he loves you, but then he won't take you to prom. But then he's not inviting you to his house to meet his parents. All he's doing is wanting to hook up with you. All he does is text you at 9 o'clock at night. I'm going to teach you how to get away from those things. You know why? Because I was that girl once. I was that girl who wanted crumbs. I was desperate for male validation. I was desperate for not even validation, specifically male affection. I wanted to be held. I wanted that. And I gave up so much of my self-respect in my younger years, especially when I was 14. I was obsessed with it. And there was a boy who gave me breadcrumbs, essentially. And he, to this day, I'm much older now. To this day, this man is still the same person. And I know this because I tried to be friends with him and it didn't really work. But essentially, I want to tell you how I became this girl who was traumatized from a narcissistic father who she had to cut off because of how abusive he was to who I am now, today. I tell you again, I suffered the biggest loss last year. Not even just in terms of like my breakup, but in terms of, I'll go into more detail in other podcasts, in other episodes, I mean. But essentially, I was betrayed in the biggest way that a girl can be betrayed by her new friends that she made to get away from her ex. Not to play the victim, but this generally was one of the worst times of my life. But you know what I did? I went to school. I still saw them. I knew I was going to cut them off. And the second that school ended, they were gone. I never spoke to any of them again. I blocked them all. I never had any interest in them. The friendship was over the second that they betrayed me, right? All of them. This whole friend group, basically. Except for one girl, who, by the way, is my best friend now. Which I suppose worked out. But honestly, at that time, I was at my lowest. I really, it was such a difficult time. But I still studied. I still did everything that I was going to do, whether they had betrayed me or not. You know why? Because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of thinking that they had hurt me. I just got on. Even though I was so upset, I cried for weeks because of what they did. I got out of it. And I look at myself and I look at I had my biggest fears realized. I had my biggest fears happen to me. Things that people are so, especially women are so afraid of. Imagine a man that you spend so much time with, that you love, that you think you have a good relationship, and that's it, you're replaced within 4 months, which obviously I'm not saying that anyone's done anything wrong, but I couldn't ignore the way I felt because I was very much wow, this is not that nice. Essentially, again, what I'm doing in this podcast is I want you guys to relate to a female experience. Now, obviously, some of your experience might be different. Maybe some of your experience is the same. Maybe you are going through something. And I just want you to know that you're not alone. So many people go through such difficult situations, but they don't talk about it. I don't like to talk about mine because I'd rather have a nice life. I'd rather, go on and laugh with my friends. And I do that. I'm an unserious person. I love laughing with my friends. I love being with my friends and talking. Obviously, recently I did have to cut a lot of them off. But again, I'd rather be lonely than be with toxic people who don't care about me. I know that I would never, ever do something consciously to hurt people. And I always tell my friends, if you have an issue with me, if I do something to you, just tell me. Communicate with me. People in this generation don't know how to communicate. It's crazy. ChatGPT is more emotionally intelligent than the people in this generation. It's crazy. I mean, have you guys noticed this? Why is it ChatGPT can give me better advice and better sympathy than my own friends? Honestly, the reason I wanted to start this podcast is because I love talking and I've been told I'm very good at it. And, hopefully I'm interesting. Hopefully people weren't just lying to me. But also, I'm good at giving advice, but also I want to talk about my experiences because I want to connect with whoever's listening. If it helps one person, it's worth it. Because honestly, I have helped people quite a lot, especially women who have gone through difficult times, because I can relate to that. I have spoken to people who never really went through anything like that. They were more sheltered. They had difficulties, but because they don't have the experiences, if I tried to tell them my experiences, they would kind of retell it in their own narrative and hurt my feelings because a lot of the time they wouldn't be able to fully philosophically consider what was actually going on because they didn't have that knowledge, that experience. It's not their fault, And at the time when they're telling me this advice, this quote brutal honesty, I'm thinking, oh, they're trying to help me. But then later on, I realized they're just talking about ignorance. They're pretending to have an understanding when they don't. And I hate those people. I'm sorry, I do. If you're one of those people, I hate you. No, I'm just kidding. But I honestly hate it when people talk about things that they don't have any understanding of because they didn't experience it. Like, there's a difference between knowing things by the textbook. Like, for example, there's a difference between someone knowing how to fly a plane and someone reading all the information on how to fly a plane. This is even a philosophical thing called the knowledge argument, but I could talk about that later. By the way, I'm very interested in philosophy and psychology. Like, that's what I did my A-levels in. So I will kind of bring in my knowledge in this podcast as well. But also, please let me know recommendations, everything. But I do have a list of like possible titles for episodes. So yeah, this was basically an introduction. I just wanted to dive straight in. I did talk about quite a lot of things. I will try to keep it more niche in the next episodes, but this is basically what you're getting. So thank you so much for listening. This is Natasha Bellefort at Becoming Her. Anyways, thank you so much.